At the will reading, the lawyer said I inherited a rundown house and $10. The room burst into laughter. My dad sneered, "You wasted your time on a broke old man, and now all you get is a pile of junk." I just smiled and walked out. But the serial number on that bill led me to a truth that made my dad crumble in fear. Imagine being the black sheep, constantly ridiculed, watching your family mock everything you are. Then, when the one person who truly believed in you passes away, all they leave you is a measly $10 and a cryptic number, a final, cruel joke from beyond the grave. Except, it wasn't a joke at all. It was the key to unlocking a secret so monumental, it would shatter my family's entire world and reveal a hidden legacy I could never have dreamed of. My name's Eli. I'm 29, and I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's a quiet city, nothing like Philly or Pittsburgh, just a charming little place by the Susquehanna River with old brick buildings and crisp autumn air. For years, my escape was the university library. I'm an archivist, sorting through old books and dusty documents. It's not a fancy job, doesn't pay much, but I loved it. There's something magical about those forgotten pages, especially the Cold War era. It felt like a mysterious novel coming to life right in my hands. But to my family? Oh, to them, I was a complete and utter failure. Eli, still living off that pathetic salary? That was my cousin Jake's favorite line, always delivered with a smirk, like I was some alien creature. I was the useless Callahan, the only one who didn't chase money or fame in the business world. My dad, Thomas, he's a big-shot real estate entrepreneur, expanding all over Harrisburg. My Uncle Dan, his brother, always by his side in those expensive suits, flashing that polished smile. They lived in a different universe of million-dollar deals, luxury cars, and extravagant parties. And me? I was just the guy in the worn-out sweater, driving an old beat-up car, who'd rather get lost in a book than talk stocks or real estate. Our family gatherings were loud. Opulent rooms, sparkling chandeliers, fancy wine glasses. My cousins, Jake, Emily, Sarah, they'd be bragging about their European vacations, their designer watches, their new city apartments. I was usually the silent one, in the corner, pouring water, clearing plates, listening to them drone on, never once asked a single question. Eli, what do you even do in that library all day? Organize books? Huh, the job of the century. Emily once scoffed, and the whole table just erupted in laughter. I just smiled, nodded, and kept clearing. I'd gotten used to being pushed aside, to being invisible. But there was one place, one sacred place, where I never felt like an outsider. That place was my grandparents' old wooden house, tucked away in the suburbs near the Allegheny Forest. My grandpa Walter Edmund Callahan, was a tall man, though time had bent his back and turned his hair snow white. He always had an old book in his gnarled hands, or a cup of black coffee, dressed in a worn sweater and a faded cap. His house, filled with the smell of damp wood and forgotten memories, was pure sanctuary. And Grandma Maggie? She's the kindest woman I've ever known, with a warm smile and eyes that just shined with patience. They sat together, knitting or brewing tea, like an old, quiet painting, full of a life no one else saw. Because my family? They barely paid my grandparents any mind. To them, Grandpa was just a poor old man stuck in the past, someone with nothing valuable, except a crumbling wooden house and a few acres of land no one cared about. I remember my dad, Thomas, flat out saying at a party, "The old man's got nothing to leave behind. Don't expect anything." His whole life was just reading books and telling war stories. And Uncle Dan, of course, just smirked, adding, "Such a waste of land. That place could fetch a few million if sold." My heart tightened hearing that. Grandpa never said a word. He just sat there, quiet, staring out the window, like he was living in a world none of us could ever understand. But for me, Grandpa was an entire world. Every single weekend, I'd drive my beat-up car there, bringing pastries or medicine. I'd sit by their fireplace, captivated, listening to stories from the past, tales of war, soldiers, secrets he said were buried under the dust of time. His voice was low, deliberate, and every single word just carved itself into my mind. He loved history, especially the Cold War, and I'd bring him books from the library about the CIA, KGB, all those wild espionage operations. "Eli, do you know?" he'd ask, his eyes lighting up. "This world is full of secrets. Some people live their entire lives, and no one ever knows what they did to change history." Grandma would just smile and chime in, "Don't confuse the boy with your stories," but I knew she was only pretending. She loved his stories, and so did I. Those afternoons in that old house, with the crackling fire and the faint smell of baked goods, made me feel truly seen, like I belonged. I didn't need a fancy car or my family's approval. I just needed Grandpa to be healthy, Grandma to keep smiling, and their warm stories on those cold winter days. Now, not everyone in my family treated me like a ghost. My mom, Susan, she was the only one who never mocked me. A quiet woman, light brown hair always in a bun, with such sad eyes. In the Callahan family, she was almost a shadow herself, always overshadowed by Dad and Uncle Dan. She never argued with Dad, never spoke up when they ridiculed me, but I knew she loved me. Sometimes, when it was just us, she'd hold my hand and whisper, "Eli, you don't have to be like them. You just have to be yourself." In those moments, I felt like she was trying to shield me from a world she herself couldn't escape. Life went on, quiet, familiar, until one freezing late autumn evening. I was visiting my grandparents, just like always, but something was different. Grandpa sat by the fireplace, an old book in his hand, but his eyes, they weren't his usual warm, smiling eyes. They held this deep, searching gaze, like he was trying to read my very thoughts. Grandma had gone to bed early, leaving just us two, with the fire crackling softly. "Eli," he suddenly said, his voice low, serious, "if there's a secret that could change the way you see this entire family, would you want to know?" I just stared, surprised. Grandpa told stories, sure, but never anything this heavy. I tried to laugh it off. "Grandpa, are you telling spy stories again? You love that stuff." But he didn't smile. His eyes, in the flickering firelight, gleamed strangely, like he was looking right through me, into a place I couldn't see. "I'm not joking, Eli," he said, soft but firm. "There are things I've kept hidden my whole life. But maybe the time for you to know everything is coming." A chill shot down my spine. Not from the cold, but from his voice. I wanted to ask more, but he just shook his head and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're the only one I trust, Eli. Remember that." As I drove home that night, his words looped in my mind. A secret? Something that could change how I saw my family? I told myself he was just getting old, maybe rambling. But deep down, I knew Grandpa never said anything without a reason. And that look in his eyes? That wasn't confusion. It was the look of someone preparing to entrust me with something monumental. Autumn quickly gave way to winter, and with it, Grandpa's health began to fail. One day, I found him by the fireplace, breathing heavily, his face whiter than usual. Grandma, her silver hair neatly tied back, was trying to brew tea for him, her hands trembling. "He's been coughing all week," she whispered, trying to stay calm. "The doctor says it's pneumonia, but he refuses to go to the hospital. He insists on staying here." I looked at Grandpa, the man who was once so tall and strong, now worn down. His threadbare sweater seemed to hang looser, and his eyes, though still bright, held a deep exhaustion. I knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. "Grandpa, you have to see a doctor." "I'll take you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He just shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Eli, I'm old. I don't need a hospital. I just need to be here, with your grandmother and with you." He squeezed my hand gently, and I felt the warmth of his gnarled hand, though it had grown so weak. I wanted to argue, to convince him, but his eyes silenced me. They weren't the eyes of someone giving up, but of someone quietly, peacefully accepting what was coming. From that day on, I practically lived at their house, sometimes taking entire days off work. I brought medicine, cooked soup, helped Grandma clean. On those nights, I'd sit by Grandpa, listening to his stories. But they weren't about wars or spies anymore. He started talking about his own life, his youth, distant journeys he never truly detailed. "Eli, have you ever thought a person could live two lives?" he asked one evening, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his face. "Two lives?" I repeated, unsure what he meant. He just nodded, staring into the flames. "One life that everyone sees, and another that only the person themselves knows. Some things have to be buried deep, because if they're revealed, they could destroy everything." A chill went through me. I wanted to press him, needed to know more, but Grandma walked in with a tray of fresh cookies, and he immediately shifted to talking about her baking. I smiled, but inside, his words were like a stone dropped into a still lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. Meanwhile, while I was trying desperately to care for Grandpa, the rest of my family remained completely indifferent. My father, Thomas, was swamped with new real estate deals, always flying to New York or Chicago. Uncle Dan was constantly in the local papers, boasting about their company's latest big land purchase. And my cousins? Well, they were just as usual, lost in their lavish parties, exotic trips, and shiny new cars. That Thanksgiving, not a single one of them visited my grandparents. Dad called, offering a few hurried words. "Is your grandpa okay? I'm swamped. Maybe I'll stop by next week." He never came. Uncle Dan sent an expensive gift basket, imported wine and cheese, but not a single word of genuine concern. My cousins didn't even bother to call. It was just Mom and me. She brought a roasted turkey, and I brought Grandma's favorite ginger cookies. We sat around the old wooden table, eating, talking quietly. Grandpa coughed more than usual, but he still managed a weak smile, telling stories about Thanksgivings when Dad and Uncle Dan were kids. Back then, those two boys would fight over the biggest slice of pumpkin pie. He chuckled, his eyes distant. I looked at Mom. She gave me a sad smile. I knew she felt their loneliness, too, but she didn't say a word. She was always like that, my mother, as if she'd learned to accept her place in the Callahan family. In the months that followed, Grandpa's health just worsened. The pneumonia wouldn't let up, and the doctor's warnings grew grim. He might not make it through the winter. I started staying at their house even more, sometimes sleeping on that old armchair in the living room. Grandma, frail herself, cared for him with a love so fierce, so pure, I'd never seen anything like it. She'd stay up all night, placing warm cloths on his forehead, brewing ginger tea, reminding him to take his medicine. But I saw the fear in her eyes, despite her attempts to hide it. She knew he was slipping away. One night, his coughing kept him awake, so I sat by his bedside, just holding his hand. Their bedroom was small, with an old wooden bed and a window looking out onto the Allegheny forest. Moonlight streamed in, casting a silvery glow over his face. He looked at me, his eyes clouded by illness, but still so sharp. "Eli," he whispered, his voice barely there. "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." "What place, Grandpa?" My heart pounded. This was the second time he'd said something so cryptic, and I couldn't pretend it was just the ramblings of a sick old man. He squeezed my hand, stronger than I thought he could. "You'll know," he said. "Just remember, you're the only one I trust. Don't let them blind you." I wanted to ask more, to beg him for answers, but he broke into a long, terrible coughing fit and Grandma hurried in with warm water. She looked at me, her eyes silently pleading, "Don't push him." I nodded, but inside, his words were a small flame, smoldering, impossible to extinguish. In the days that followed, I started noticing things. Little details I hadn't before. Once, while helping Grandma clean, I spotted an old wooden box in the corner of the living room, locked with a small padlock. "What's this, Grandma?" I asked. She just smiled and shook her head. "It's your grandfather's. Leave it alone." I didn't press, but I couldn't get that box out of my head. Its surface was scratched, worn, like it had traveled through decades of history. Grandpa's final days were quiet. He didn't talk much anymore, but every time I visited, he'd hold my hand, as if trying to pass on some invisible strength. Grandma stayed glued to his side, never leaving him, even as she herself grew more haggard, more exhausted. My family? Still absent. Dad called once, asked a few perfunctory questions, then quickly hung up, citing an important meeting. Then, the fateful night came. I sat by his side and Grandpa opened his eyes, looking at me one last time. "Eli," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear him. "I'm proud of you." Those were his last words to me. The next morning, he passed away as quietly as he had lived. I sat there, holding his hand, feeling the last of his warmth fade. Grandma stood beside me, not crying, just gently stroking his hair. I knew her pain, but she was stronger than I could ever have imagined. "Your grandfather lived a long life, Eli," she said, her voice trembling. "And he loved you more than anyone." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. But amidst the grief, Grandpa's words echoed louder than ever in my mind. "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." I knew, instinctively, my journey was only just beginning. Grandpa's funeral was on a cold, drizzly day in Harrisburg. The sky was gray and raindrops streaked down the windows of the funeral home, as if the world itself was weeping. The room was simple, an oak coffin surrounded by white flowers. I stood in a corner, wearing an old black suit Mom had dug up. It was a little tight, but I didn't care. My mind was still lost in memories of Grandpa, his warm, low voice, his sharp eyes, those cryptic words I still couldn't decipher. And of course, my family showed up in full force. My father, Thomas, stood in the front row, immaculate in his sleek black suit. Face stern, but with that familiar hint of impatience. Uncle Dan, hair perfectly combed, expensive silk tie, stood next to him, whispering to some stranger. My cousins, Jake, Emily, and Sarah, huddled in a corner, chatting, glancing at their phones. None of them seemed genuinely grieved. To them, the funeral felt like a formality, a box to check before they returned to their important lives. Mom stood close to me, quietly holding my hand. She wore a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied, eyes red but tearless. I knew she was holding back, unwilling to let Dad or anyone else see her vulnerability. Grandma sat in the front row, right before the coffin, her frail hands clutching a handkerchief. She said nothing, just gazed at a black and white photo of Grandpa from his youth, a rare smile, vibrant eyes. I wondered what she was thinking. Did she know about that place he'd mentioned? Did she too carry the secrets he had kept? The funeral itself was brief. A priest offered a few prayers, describing Grandpa as a simple man who loved his family and lived a full life. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that he was so much more than simple. He was extraordinary. He taught me about history, honesty, how to live rightly. But I stayed silent. I knew, in that room, no one truly cared about Grandpa the way I did. Afterward, the family moved to an upscale restaurant downtown for the reception. I didn't want to go, but Mom insisted. "Eli, you have to be there for Grandpa," she said. I nodded, though all I wanted was to go back to that wooden house, sit by the fireplace, and just remember the afternoons he told me stories. The restaurant, chosen by my father, had glass walls overlooking the river, tables draped in white silk. People laughed, clinked wine glasses, talked about work, real estate, upcoming vacations. No one mentioned Grandpa, except for a few empty pleasantries. He passed peacefully, didn't he? Or he was old. It was his time. I sat at the end of the table, quietly eating cold soup, listening to conversations I had no part in. Jake was bragging about his new Tesla. Emily was showing off some designer bag from Paris. My father and Uncle Dan were already deep into another real estate project, their voices brimming with ambition. "That land is gold," Dad said, his eyes gleaming. "Just need to sort out a few issues with the city council and we'll be rolling in it." Uncle Dan nodded, smirking. I just watched them, wondering if they truly knew how Grandpa had lived, what he thought, or what he'd left behind. Grandma didn't come to the restaurant. She said she wanted to stay at the funeral home for a while longer, then go straight back to the house. I wanted to stay with her, but Mom had insisted I go with the family. She needs time alone, Eli, she'd said. I understood, but I couldn't shake the vast emptiness in my heart. Grandpa was gone, and I felt like I was losing a part of myself. A few days later, Grandpa's lawyer, Harold Steinberg, contacted the family. It was time for the reading of the will. Steinberg was a middle-aged man, tall, thin, salt and pepper hair, silver-rimmed glasses. He had this stern, deliberate way of speaking, like every word was carefully chosen. The reading took place in his downtown office, a small, elegant room with wooden bookshelves and a big table in the center. The entire family gathered, but this time, there was no somber air. It was a palpable, almost greedy anticipation. My father sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, his gaze sharp, impatient. Uncle Dan next to him, constantly checking his watch. Jake, Emily, and Sarah whispered and giggled like kids waiting for Christmas presents. My mom sat beside me, silent as always, hands clasped tight in her lap. Grandma wasn't there. She said she trusted Grandpa to do what was right. I sat in the corner, feeling more out of place than ever. I didn't expect anything, really. I knew Grandpa wasn't wealthy, not by my family standards. The wooden house, a few acres, his old books. That's what I thought he had. But deep down, I hoped he'd left me something. Not money, but a sign, an answer to his cryptic words. Steinberg began reading, his voice steady, clear. Grandpa had divided his assets into small portions for his children and grandchildren. A bit of savings for Dad, Uncle Dan, a few trinkets for my cousins. Nobody looked satisfied. That's it, Jake muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Emily crossed her arms, pouting. My father frowned. Uncle Dan just shook his head, like they'd expected a hidden treasure map. Then Steinberg looked directly at me, adjusted his glasses, and continued. To my grandson, Elliot James Callahan, I leave the old property number 1, for $17 and $10. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then it erupted. Jake was first, bursting out laughing, pointing at me. Old property number 1417? What's that, a pile of moldy books? Emily giggled, covering her mouth. $10? The old man sure knew how to joke. Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. My father didn't laugh, but his eyes held a look of pure contempt, like I was the punchline. Uncle Dan just smirked, muttering something to Dad I couldn't quite catch. I sat there, the ground beneath me just giving way. I didn't care about the money, but why something so meaningless? Property 1417? $10? I looked at Steinberg, desperate for an explanation, but he only gave a stern nod, revealing nothing more. That's it? My father asked, his voice cold. Nothing else. Steinberg shook his head. That's the entirety of the will. If there are no questions, I'll conclude the meeting. The family stood, chairs scraping against the wooden floor, a grating sound in my ears. Jake clapped me on the shoulder, laughing loud enough for the whole room to hear. Congrats, Eli. Now you're the proud owner of $10 and a pile of junk. Emily and Sarah laughed along. My father gave me one last dismissive glance before walking out with Uncle Dan. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. I left the law office feeling hollow. The rain still fell, soaking my coat as I stepped onto the street. I wasn't angry at Grandpa, never could be. But I was confused, deeply disappointed, and above all, I felt like I'd missed something crucial. His words, "Don't trust what you see on the surface," echoed in my mind like a puzzle with no answer. That evening, I drove straight to my grandparents' wooden house. Grandma was sitting by the fireplace, knitting, the firelight dancing on her face. She looked up, offering a faint smile. Eli, why are you here so late? I sat beside her, recounting the will reading, my voice heavy. I don't care about money, Grandma, but why would he leave me something so meaningless? Old property number 1, for $17, $10. I just don't understand. She stopped knitting, placing her frail hands over mine. Eli, she said, her voice soft but firm. Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. If he chose you, there's a purpose. She stood, went to the bedroom, and returned with a small, tarnished brass key. She placed it in my hand. Your grandfather once said, the answers are there. Go to the old house, Eli. You'll find what he wanted you to know. I looked at the key, the cold metal sending a chill through my palm. My heart beat faster. The old house. I asked. You mean property number 1417? She nodded, her eyes holding a secret she couldn't voice. You'll know when you get there, she said, echoing Grandpa's own words. Trust him, Eli. And trust yourself. I left that wooden house that night, the key heavy in my pocket. The rain had stopped, but the cold wind still rustled through the oak trees, whispering something I couldn't yet understand. I knew, without a doubt, I couldn't stop. Grandpa had left me a puzzle, and I was compelled to find a solution. For days after the will reading, I felt like a ghost. My job at the library, once my sanctuary, now just made me restless. I'd go through the motions, sorting documents, answering questions, but my mind was utterly consumed by that brass key Grandma gave me and the strange $10 bill in my wallet. I must have turned that bill over 100 times, staring at Benjamin Franklin's face, examining every tiny detail. But it was just an old, crumpled piece of currency. Or was it? Grandma's words echoed relentlessly. Asterisk, your grandfather never did anything without a reason. The answers are there. Asterisk, but where was there? And what on earth was old property number 1417? That weekend, I finally decided to dig deeper. I called Grandma, asking if she knew anything more about that number. She was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. Eli, your grandfather once mentioned a place, an old house in the suburbs near the old road leading to the river. He said it was where he kept important things. Try looking there. Maybe 1417 is connected to that. I hung up and immediately started searching online. Harrisburg addresses, anything related to 1417. After what felt like forever, I found an old listing, 1417 Old River Road. A remote, almost forgotten road in the suburbs, near the Susquehanna. No real information about the house, just that it had been abandoned for years. A jolt of electricity shot through me. Could this be it? The place Grandpa had mentioned? I stuffed the $10 bill and the key into my pocket, grabbed my backpack, and drove out of the city. Old River Road was winding, covered in dry leaves and overgrown weeds. Houses grew sparse as I left the city behind, the landscape turning desolate, just bare trees and the faint glimmer of the river. When I finally reached 1417, I could barely believe my eyes. Before me stood this dilapidated wooden house, looking like it had been forgotten by time, abandoned for decades. The roof sagged, windows were shattered, wooden walls peeled like old skin, revealing deep cracks. Weeds grew knee-high, and a rusted "No Trespassing" sign hung loosely by the gate. I parked the car, a shiver running down my spine. I stepped over the gate, carefully picking my way along the path, avoiding rotten boards. A cold wind blew, carrying the damp scent of earth and an eerie, absolute silence. I tried the brass key in the front door, but it didn't fit. The door itself was so rotted, a gentle push sent it creaking open, like something out of a horror movie. Inside, it was dark, freezing. A thick layer of dust coated the wooden floor, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold. Scattered remnants of old furniture, a table with a broken leg, chairs draped in cobwebs, a shattered lamp, littered the room. I turned on my phone's flashlight, sweeping it around every corner. The house was small, a living room, a tiny kitchen, a hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. I checked everywhere, tapping on walls, lifting tattered rugs, desperate for a clue. Nothing. Just dust and silence. I started to feel a crushing disappointment. Was I just chasing an illusion? Had Grandpa really left me a puzzle with no solution? I sank onto an old, dusty chair, trying to suppress the growing despair. Then, almost idly, I pulled out the $10 bill again, examining its serial number, J1417K89632. The 1417 had led me here, but what about the rest? After nearly an hour, just as I was about to give up, to simply walk away, my heel snagged on a floorboard near the fireplace. It produced a strange, hollow sound. I knelt down, my heart suddenly racing. I pried at it gently. The board was loose. When I pulled harder, it came free, revealing a small metal hatch with a combination lock. My heart hammered. A hidden cellar, in an abandoned house no one knew Grandpa owned. I looked at the $10 bill, focusing on the serial number. If 1417 was the address, could the numbers be the code? I entered 1417 into the lock. Click, a soft click, and the hatch popped open. I trembled, not from the cold, but from a dizzying mix of excitement and sheer terror. What had Grandpa hidden here? And why? Why had he chosen me to find it? I stood there, staring down the narrow wooden staircase that plunged into absolute darkness. My phone's flashlight only illuminated the first few steps. Below was a pitch-black void, swallowing everything. The air rising from the cellar was cold, damp, carrying the scent of old earth and rusted metal. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Grandpa," I whispered, as if he were still there, guiding me. "What do you want me to do here?" There was no answer, only the faint whistle of wind through the hatch, like a warning. I descended carefully, each step creaking under my weight on the rotted wood. Every single step felt like it was pulling me deeper into a secret I wasn't ready to face. At the bottom, I swept my flashlight around. The cellar was small, just a storage room really, with stained concrete walls and an old wooden table in the center. On that table sat a small safe with a combination lock, a metal box without a lock, and a stack of dusty documents. An old oil lamp hung on the wall, but I didn't dare light it. My heart pounded so hard, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I tried entering 1417 into the safe, hoping the code from the $10 bill would work again. Nothing. The lock wouldn't budge. I glanced at the bill again, the serial number, J1417K89632. I tried the remaining digits, 8963. Click, a sharp click echoed in the silence, and the safe opened. I could barely breathe. Grandpa, he had planned everything, step by step, leading me right here. Inside the safe lay a thick bundle of documents tied with a leather cord, a black leather-bound notebook, and a small, silver USB drive. I grabbed the notebook first, my hands trembling, flipping through its pages. Grandpa's handwriting, firm and neat, filled with names, dates, locations, and strange symbols I couldn't decipher. There were communication diagrams, maps of Eastern Europe with marked points, notes about operations like Blue Horizon and Shadow Relay. One page clearly read, Berlin, December 3rd, 1978. Met K at rendezvous. Defection successful. I turned the page and there it was, a black and white photo taped inside. A younger grandpa, in a sharp suit, standing beside a stranger in a military uniform. The handwritten caption beneath it read, Operation Blue Horizon. CIA, CIA, the word hit me like a physical blow. A cold chill ran through me. I shook my head, trying to process it. Grandpa Walt? The man in the threadbare sweater, sitting by the fireplace, telling history stories? He was a spy? A character ripped straight from those espionage tales he used to share with me? I couldn't believe it, but these pages, written in his own hand, couldn't be fake. I moved to the bundle of documents. Inside were contracts stamped with government seals, some declassified, titled, Strategic Coordinator for European Operations, 1974 to 1988. Grandpa's full name, Walter Edmund Callahan, was printed clearly, alongside details of operations in East Germany, Poland, and Hungary. One document explicitly stated, W. Callahan, codename Falcon, responsible for coordinating a network of operatives in Eastern Europe. My head spun. Grandpa wasn't just a history enthusiast. He was history. A man behind covert operations, defections, and intricate schemes that shaped the world. But then, what truly stunned me was the small metal box beside the safe. I opened it. Inside, another thinner file and a small hard drive labeled WC Personal. The file was titled, Thomas Callahan and Daniel Callahan. My heart stopped. My father. My Uncle Dan. I flipped through it, quickly finding copies of invoices, contracts, and Grandpa's handwritten notes. One page read, TC and DC suspected money laundering through Bright Future Charity. 2018 to 2023. Another listed real estate transactions with mismatched figures, accompanied by a note, links to state officials, fraudulent contracts. There were even copies of emails between Dad and Uncle Dan, discussing a plan to transfer funds through offshore accounts. I sank to the cellar floor, my hands trembling. Grandpa had been watching them. He knew. He knew they were doing something terribly, terribly wrong. I kept flipping and found a carefully folded handwritten letter in Grandpa's familiar script. I opened it and read each line. Asterisk Eli, if you're reading this letter, it means you found the cellar. I'm sorry for placing this burden on your shoulders, but you're the only one I trust. I've lived two lives. One is the man the family knew and one the world could never know. But the most painful thing isn't the secrets I kept from the war, but what I discovered about my two sons. I've been watching Thomas and Daniel for years. Ever since I suspected their company was involved in shady activities, I found evidence of money laundering, collusion with officials, and a fake charity to hide illegal profits. I wrote a report intending to send it to the authorities, but I couldn't. They're my sons, Eli. I didn't want them in prison. Didn't want the family torn apart. But I also couldn't let their crimes continue. I leave this decision to you. On the hard drive, you'll find a video I recorded explaining everything. If you think they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. Be strong, as I've always believed you could be. I'm proud of you. Grandpa Walt. Asterisk tears blurred my vision, falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. Grandpa had carried this immense burden, all alone, his entire life. He knew my father and uncle had gone astray, but he couldn't bring himself to destroy his own sons. Instead, he'd passed it to me. A burden, yes, but also an incredible, profound trust. I wiped my tears, picked up the hard drive. I had to watch that video. I needed to hear Grandpa's voice explain it all. As I climbed the stairs out of that cellar, I felt like I was no longer the Eli from a few hours ago. This place, this secret, had changed everything. Grandpa wasn't just a simple man. He was a spy, a silent hero. And he knew everything about my father's and uncle's crimes. But he was also a father, unable to destroy his own children. And now he'd entrusted that responsibility to me. I left that abandoned house at 1417 Old River Road in the dark, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. The letter, the notebook, the hard drive from Grandpa, they were tucked inside, but they felt like stones pressing against my chest. I had to verify what I'd found. I needed someone who understood history, the Cold War, who could help me grasp the truth of who Grandpa truly was. The next morning, I drove straight to the university library. I knew just the person, Dr. Leonard Brooks, a history professor specializing in the Cold War. He was in his 60s, with disheveled silver hair and round glasses that always slid down his nose. We chatted a few times when he came for research materials, bonding over discussions about the KGB, the CIA, and the secrets of the 20th century. If anyone could make sense of those cellar documents, it was him. I brought the leather-bound notebook and a few photos, carefully wrapped in cloth. I didn't bring everything. I was terrified of what might happen if someone discovered the full extent of it. When I stepped into Dr. Brooks's office, he was sitting amid stacks of books, a quill pen in hand, looking like a scholar from a bygone era. He looked up, a friendly smile on his face. Eli, what a surprise. How can I help you? I hesitated, then placed the notebook and photos on his desk. Dr. Brooks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I found these. I think they're related to the Cold War, but I'm not sure. Can you help me figure them out? He raised an eyebrow, picked up the notebook, and flipped through a few pages. His eyes widened. He adjusted his glasses, reading more closely. "Where did you get this, Eli?" His voice had suddenly turned serious, his friendly demeanor gone. I gave him a condensed version of the truth. I found them among my grandfather's belongings, that he loved history and might have been involved in something significant. I carefully omitted any mention of the CIA or my father and uncle, just enough to avoid suspicion. Dr. Brooks kept flipping, pausing at a page with coded symbols and communication diagrams. "This is standard CIA cipher," he murmured, almost to himself. He picked up one of the photos, the one of Grandpa in Berlin in 1978, and froze. "Eli, do you realize what you're holding? These ciphers, the structure of the notes, the diagrams, this isn't ordinary documentation. This is government-level material. The kind only someone with high clearance would have access to." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" I managed. He looked at me, his gaze sharp. "If these belonged to your grandfather, Walter Callahan, then he wasn't just a history enthusiast. He could have been a major figure, a very major figure in intelligence operations." He pointed to a note in the photo about a covert operative who disappeared in 1978. "If your grandfather was involved in this, he could have been a coordinator, or even a regional commander." My head spun. This aligned perfectly with the documents in the cellar, strategic coordinator for European operations. But hearing it from an expert, from someone else, made it feel so much more real. More terrifying. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Brooks nodded, flipping through more pages. "These ciphers are internal CIA communication codes, used in covert operations. And this photo. Operation Blue Horizon. I've read about that. If your grandfather was Falcon, as the documents suggest, he didn't just participate, he could have been running an entire CIA network." I sank into a chair, feeling as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Grandpa." The man in a worn sweater, telling stories by the fireplace. A CIA commander. I remembered those afternoons when he spoke about the Cold War, his eyes lighting up as he described nameless spies. Turns out, he wasn't just telling stories. He was reliving his own memories. "Can you check further?" I asked. "I mean, to confirm this is real." Dr. Brooks nodded. "I have a contact at the National Archives. They have declassified records on Cold War operations. I can send them some details from this notebook, without mentioning you or your grandfather, just to verify." He paused, his tone grave. "But, Eli, you need to understand, if this is real, you're holding something that could cause serious trouble. Even declassified documents like these can attract unwanted attention." I nodded, a deep unease rising within me. "I understand," I said. "But I need to know the truth. Grandpa trusted me, and I have to find out why." Dr. Brooks agreed, promising to contact his friend and get back to me in a few days. He handed me the notebook and photos back, urging me to keep them safe. "Don't let anyone know you have these, Eli. Not everyone will be happy you possess them." On the drive home, Dr. Brooks's words echoed in my head, a constant loop. Grandpa was Falcon, a CIA commander, a silent hero. But he was also a father, heartbroken over his son's crimes. His letter resonated deeply. Asterisk, if they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose to continue their crimes, I leave the decision to you. Asterisk, the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. My father and Uncle Dan, the ones who always saw me as useless, were living off dirty money, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I got home, locked the door carefully, and hid the backpack in a concealed corner of my closet. I didn't dare let anyone see those documents. Not my mother, not Grandma, and certainly not Dad or Uncle Dan. But I knew I couldn't stop. Grandpa had chosen me, and I had to do the right thing, even if it meant confronting my own family. The days after meeting Dr. Brooks were thick with tension. Every creak of the floorboards, every ping of a text message, made me jump, like someone was watching me. The documents from the cellar, the notebook, the letter, the hard drive, felt like ticking time bombs, waiting for me to make a decision. Dr. Brooks had promised to verify everything, but he'd also warned me, asterisk, these things could cause big trouble. Eli, be careful. Asterisk, I knew he was right, but I couldn't just sit still and pretend nothing had happened. Grandpa's letter just kept echoing. My father, Thomas Callahan, was a stern, patriarchal man who'd always seen me as a failure. Uncle Dan, with his slick smile and cunning mind, was even more intimidating. I knew they wouldn't listen easily, but I had to try. For Grandpa. For myself. I decided to meet them at my father's office in downtown Harrisburg. Callahan and Sons Real Estate, housed in a sleek glass building with polished signs and their company logo etched on the door. I rarely came here. The last time was years ago, when Dad tried to convince me to quit my library job and work for him. I arrived at the office on a rainy afternoon, carrying copies of just a few documents from the cellar. Just enough to prove I knew the truth, but not everything. I didn't want them to know about the hard drive or Grandpa's video. Not yet. When I entered the meeting room, Dad was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing papers. Uncle Dan stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice smooth as he charmed someone. Both looked up as I walked in, and I immediately felt the cold weight of Dad's stare. "Eli, what are you doing here?" Dad asked, his tone barely concealing irritation. "Don't you know to call first?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I need to talk to you and Uncle Dan. About the company. And about Grandpa. Uncle Dan hung up, smirking. Grandpa? Why are you bringing up the old man now? He left you $10, didn't he? He laughed, a loud, grating sound, as if it was the funniest joke. I didn't return his smile. I placed the documents on the table, opening to the first page, a copy of an invoice from the Bright Future charity, with mismatched figures, accompanied by Grandpa's handwritten note, asterisk, suspected money laundering. 2020, asterisk, I found some things among Grandpa's belongings, I said, my voice steady but firm. These show your company is doing something wrong. Money laundering. Fraudulent contracts with state officials. A fake charity. The room fell silent. Dad stared at the document, his face darkening. Uncle Dan stepped forward, grabbed the paper, skimmed it, and then tossed it back onto the table. What the hell are you talking about, Eli? He growled, his voice thick with anger. You think you can just waltz in here with some nonsense papers and accuse us? I'm not accusing, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I just want you and Dad to stop. To make things right before it goes too far. Grandpa knew everything. He'd been watching you for years. He didn't go public because he didn't want you both in prison, but he left these to me. He told me to do the right thing. Dad stood up, his hands slamming onto the table, his eyes burning into me. You dare talk about the right thing, he shouted. Asterisk you asterisk, a library clerk, living off a pitiful salary. You dare stand here and lecture me on how to run my business? Your grandfather was a stubborn old fool, and so are you. These are fake, Eli. Fake. You think you can tear down this family with a few pieces of paper? They're not fake, I replied, my voice rising more than I intended. I have proof, Dad. Invoices, emails, transactions, and more. I just want you and Uncle Dan to stop. To dissolve the fake charity. To return what doesn't belong to you. I don't want to take this public. Uncle Dan sneered, stepping closer. You're threatening us, Eli? Who do you think you are? Some kid with a few papers and a hero complex? I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your reputation, everything. I felt the blood rush to my head, but I stood my ground. I'm not trying to be a hero, I said. I'm just doing what Grandpa believed I could. He gave me a chance to talk to you first. But if you and Dad don't listen, I won't stop. Dad stepped towards me, pointing a finger in my face. You dare, he roared. Do you know what this would do? It would destroy this family. Destroy the company Dan and I built from nothing. Stop this nonsense. I looked straight into his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small before him. If you and Uncle Dan won't change, I said, my voice clear and steady, I'll have no choice but to expose the truth to the public. Uncle Dan laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that didn't quite hide the tension in his eyes. You're crazy, Eli. Completely crazy. You think you can take us on? We have money, connections, power. You're just a nobody. I didn't respond. I gathered the documents, stuffed them back into my backpack, and left the office. As I stepped outside, the rain soaked my coat. I heard Dad shouting something from inside, but I didn't turn back. I had given them a chance, just as Grandpa wanted. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't stop. And I also knew that my next step would change everything forever. I drove home through the rain, my mind reeling, utterly flooded with the scornful words and angry shouts of my father and Uncle Dan. I had hoped they would listen, admit their mistakes, finally stop. But I was so wrong. Not only did they refuse, they threatened me, treating me like some insignificant problem to be eliminated. But they didn't know. They didn't know I'd seen too much, understood too much, and that I carried Grandpa's promise. Asterisk, do the right thing. Asterisk, back in my apartment, I sat at the table, just staring at the backpack. It held the documents, the hard drive, Grandpa's letter. I pulled out that photo of him in Berlin in 1978, gazing at his sharp, resolute eyes. He had lived a life, bursting with secrets and immense responsibilities, but he had never turned his back on the truth. I knew then I couldn't either. Yet, deciding to expose the truth, it wasn't easy. I wasn't just facing my father and Uncle Dan, I was facing the entire Callahan family, the very people who always saw me as an outsider. They would turn against me, despise me. But I had no other choice. I opened my laptop, plugged in the hard drive, and watched Grandpa's video again. His warm, steady voice felt like it was speaking directly to my soul. Asterisk, if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. I trust you. Asterisk, I wiped away my tears, picked up my phone, and called Harold Steinberg, the lawyer who had read Grandpa's will. Eli? Steinberg's voice came through, calm as always. What's going on? I need to meet you, I said, my voice firm. I found some things from Grandpa. Important things. I need your help to get them to the right people. Steinberg was silent for a moment. All right, he replied. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. The next morning, I went to Steinberg's office, bringing everything, all the documents, the hard drive, the notebook. I told him everything. About the cellar, Grandpa's CIA past, and the undeniable evidence against my father and Uncle Dan. He listened, nodded slowly, reviewing the documents with absolute, quiet focus. Are you sure you want to do this, Eli? He asked, his gaze stern. If you hand these over to the press and the Department of Justice, there's no turning back. Your family won't forgive you. I nodded, my heart heavy, but my resolve unshaken. I know, I said. But Grandpa trusted me. I have to do the right thing. Steinberg agreed, promising to contact a trusted investigative reporter and forward the documents to the Department of Justice. You've done the right thing, Eli, he said. But brace yourself. A storm is coming. A week later, everything exploded. The first article hit the Harrisburg Times like a bomb. Callahan and Sons real estate accused of money laundering and fraud. The piece cited documents from an anonymous source, detailing the fake charity, the illegal transactions, the shadowy ties to state officials. The company's stock plummeted that very day. Police raided my father's and Uncle Dan's offices, freezing their bank accounts. Both were immediately summoned for hearings. My family was in absolute chaos. Jake called, screaming at me, "What have you done, Eli? You've destroyed this family." Emily and Sarah sent furious texts, calling me a traitor. Dad didn't call, but Uncle Dan sent a single, chilling message, *, "You'll regret this, Eli." *, only my mother stood by me. One evening, she showed up at my apartment, her eyes red, swollen. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said, her voice trembling. "But you're going to suffer for it." I didn't defend myself or try to explain. I just said, quietly, I just did what Grandpa believed I could do. Mom nodded, hugged me tightly, and left. I knew she was caught in the impossible middle, between me and Dad, between love and loyalty. The family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, they all turned their backs. They cut off contact. I became the enemy in their eyes, the one who dismantled the Callahan empire. But I didn't regret it. Every time I looked at Grandpa's photo, I felt him right there beside me, smiling. The weeks that followed the article's publication engulfed Harrisburg in a media frenzy. Television, newspapers, social media, buzzing incessantly about the Callahan and Sons scandal. Images of my father and Uncle Dan were everywhere. Evening news, investigative reports, even angry status updates from local residents. Their company collapsed swiftly, accounts frozen, major contracts canceled. I heard they hired the best lawyers, but the evidence from Grandpa's hard drive was too clear, too detailed. They couldn't deny it. I didn't follow the news much. Every headline, every article, felt like a knife, a stark reminder that I was the one who set this in motion. Not because I wanted to destroy my family, but because I was compelled to do what Grandpa believed I could. Still, that didn't erase the ache in my heart. I was lonelier than ever. Grandma, though she still loved me, seemed too exhausted to face what was happening. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said over the phone, her voice frail. "But let me have some peace for a while." I understood. She had lost Grandpa, and now her family was unraveling. I didn't blame her. One morning, as I sat in my apartment, staring at that 1978 Berlin photo of Grandpa, my phone rang. It was Harold Steinberg. "Eli, you need to come to my office now," he said, his voice serious, but with a strange, almost imperceptible hint of excitement. "There's a part of the will I haven't disclosed. It concerns you." I was stunned. Another part of the will? I thought everything had been revealed at that awful reading, the $10, old property 1417, which turned out to be the abandoned house. But Steinberg's tone made it clear, this was no small matter. I drove to his office, a mix of frantic curiosity and simmering anxiety swirling within me. When I walked in, Steinberg was seated behind his desk, a thick stack of documents in front of him. He smiled, a rare sight for someone as stern as he was. "Eli," he began, "your grandfather, Walter Callahan, was an extraordinary man. And he left you something far greater than what your family knows." I sat down, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I found the cellar, the documents, everything." Steinberg slid the stack of documents towards me. "This," he said, "is your grandfather's hidden estate. During his time with the CIA, he amassed a significant fortune. Not from illegal activities, but from savvy investments, overseas properties, and even shares in a Silicon Valley tech company. The estimated total value, hundreds of millions of dollars." I was speechless, unable to process it. Hundreds of millions of dollars? Grandpa? The man in the threadbare sweater, living in an old wooden house? He was that wealthy? I shook my head, desperately trying to make sense of it. But why didn't he tell anyone? Why did he live like that? Steinberg gave a sad, knowing smile. "Your grandfather didn't care about money, Eli. He chose to live simply because that's just who he was. But he wanted this fortune to be used for good. And he left it all to you. With one condition." "What condition?" I asked, my voice trembling. Steinberg opened a page in the documents and read aloud. "The entire estate is to be transferred to Elliot James Callahan on the condition that he uses a portion to establish an educational fund for underprivileged children. A dream Walter Callahan never had the chance to fulfill. The remainder is for Elliot to use freely, but in accordance with the conscience and values his grandfather believed in." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the elegant office. Grandpa hadn't just left money. He'd left a mission. A true legacy, not just for me, but for people he'd never even met. I remembered the afternoons he spoke about the importance of education, how he wanted every child to have a chance to learn. It wasn't just talk. It was his lifelong plan. I wiped my tears and looked at Steinberg. "I understand, sir," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I'll do what Grandpa wanted." Steinberg nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're a good man, Eli. Your grandfather knew that. And I believe you'll use this fortune wisely." I left the office, my mind reeling with numbers and newfound responsibilities. But more than that, I felt a deeper, unbreakable connection to Grandpa. He wasn't just a spy, a silent hero. He was a man with a vision, someone who wanted to leave the world better than he found it. And he had trusted me to carry on that dream. In the months that followed, I began fulfilling Grandpa's wishes. I established the Walter Callahan Education Fund for underprivileged children in Harrisburg and the surrounding areas. I hired a team of experts to manage the fund, ensuring every dollar went directly toward building schools, providing scholarships, and supporting kids who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. But I wanted to do more. I wanted the world to know about Grandpa. Not just as Walter Callahan, the simple man in the wooden house, but as Falcon, the silent hero of the Cold War. I used part of the estate to purchase a small building in downtown Harrisburg, transforming it into an exhibit called The Secret History of a Great Citizen. I displayed declassified documents from the cellar, photos of Grandpa in Berlin, a replica of his notebook. I didn't reveal highly sensitive details, but it was enough to show people how extraordinary his life had been. The exhibit was free to the public, and every day I saw students, scholars, and locals visit, reading about Grandpa, marveling at his incredible story. A year later, I took Grandma for a walk in the park near the exhibit. She had aged noticeably, but her eyes lit up when she saw Grandpa's name on the large sign. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Eli," she said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, feeling as though Grandpa was right there with us, watching from somewhere. My family never forgave me. Jake, Emily, Sarah, all the other relatives, they never reached out again. Dad and Uncle Dan faced their hearings, and though they haven't been convicted yet, Callahan and Sons has completely collapsed. Mom stayed in touch, but she rarely spoke about Dad. I knew she was hurting, caught between two worlds, but she respected my choice. Standing in front of the exhibit one crisp autumn afternoon, I reflected on my journey. I had lost my family, yes, but I had found a far greater purpose. Grandpa taught me that the truth, however painful, is always worth fighting for. His legacy wasn't just money or secrets. It was trust, integrity, and hope for a better world. I carry this message with me every day, not just for those visiting the exhibit, but for myself. Live true to your conscience, even if the world turns its back on you. The truth may be buried, but it will always find a way to rise. That was the greatest lesson Grandpa left me, and I will live by it every single day.